Imagine you're in the middle of a dense forest. Rain is hammering down through the canopy. Everything around you is soaked. Your clothes are drenched, water is running down your face, and you're shivering. You need fire, not just want it. You need it for warmth, for cooking, for survival. Most of us today would pull out a lighter or waterproof matches and still struggle. But Native Americans? They could start a fire in these exact conditions using nothing but materials from the forest around them. No matches, no lighter fluid, just knowledge, skill, and an understanding of nature that took thousands of years to develop. Today we're going to explore exactly how they did it. And I'm not talking about ideal conditions with dry wood neatly stacked. I mean real, pouring rain. The kind of weather that makes you want to give up. Because that's when this knowledge mattered most. If you're interested in survival skills, bushcraft, or just understanding how people live before modern conveniences, stay with me. What you're about to learn might just save your life someday. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. The fundamental challenge. Let's start by understanding what makes starting a fire in the rain so difficult. Fire needs three things: fuel, oxygen, and heat. We call this the fire triangle. Take away any one of these, and you've got nothing. Rain attacks all three elements at once. It soaks your fuel, making it harder to ignite. It cools everything down, stealing the heat you're trying to generate. And heavy rain can even displace oxygen near your fire site. But here's what Native Americans understood that most people don't. Wetness is relative. Yes, when it's raining, everything looks wet. But not everything is wet in the same way. The outside of a log might be soaked, but the inside? Often bone dry. The top layer of bark on a standing dead tree? Drenched. But peel that back, and you'll find dry material underneath. The forest floor might be a soggy mess, but look up, and there's dry material trapped under overhangs and in tree hollows. Native Americans were masters at reading the forest. They knew where to look, what to look for, and how to process materials even when conditions seemed impossible. This knowledge wasn't written in books. It was passed down through generations, taught by doing, refined through necessity. Different tribes in different regions developed their own techniques based on local resources. The Ojibwe people in the Great Lakes region worked with birch bark and white cedar. The Apache in the Southwest had different materials and different challenges. Pacific Northwest tribes dealt with constant moisture and developed methods specifically for their rainforest environment. But all of them shared the same fundamental understanding. Starting fire in the rain isn't about fighting the weather. It's about working with what nature provides, even in the worst conditions. The crucial first step, material selection. Before Native Americans ever tried to create a spark or friction, they gathered materials. This step determined whether they'd have fire or not. Rush it and you'd waste hours. Do it right and fire was almost guaranteed. They divided materials into three categories: tinder, kindling, and fuel wood. Each served a specific purpose, and each had to be selected with care. Tinder was the most critical. This is the material that catches your initial spark or ember. It needs to be extremely dry and fine enough to ignite from minimal heat. In the rain, finding this seems impossible, but Native Americans knew exactly where to look. Birch bark was gold. The papery outer bark of birch trees contains natural oils that make it waterproof and incredibly flammable. Even in pouring rain, if you peel bark from a standing birch, the inner layers are often dry and ready to use. You can shred it into fine strips that catch fire from the smallest ember. Tribes in birch country always carried a supply of this bark because it was that valuable. But what if you're not in birch territory? Cedar bark works beautifully. The inner bark can be processed into fluffy, fibrous material that's like nature's cotton. When it's dry, it catches fire almost instantly. You take a chunk of inner cedar bark and work it between your hands, breaking down the fibers, making it softer and fluffier. This processing actually helps dry out any moisture. Pine resin was another secret weapon. Even in wet conditions, you can find dried sap on pine trees. This stuff is sticky, flammable, and water resistant. Native Americans would collect it, sometimes mixing it with other materials to create a kind of natural fire starter. Some would even carry small pouches of dried resin specifically for emergencies. Fungus growing on dead trees, particularly a type called tinder fungus or horsehoof fungus, was highly prized. When properly prepared and dried, it smolders beautifully. You can catch a spark in it and keep it going for a long time. Finding this in the rain meant looking at standing dead trees, checking the dry side, the side protected from the prevailing wind and rain, dried grass, cattail fluff, milkweed silk. All of these made excellent tinder. The trick was knowing where to find dry material even when it was raining. Native Americans would check inside hollow logs, under rock overhangs, in caves, even in the dry center of grass clumps where the outer layer protected the inner stems. Kindling came next. These are small sticks and branches that bridge the gap between your tiny tinder flame and your larger fuel logs. In the rain, you're not picking up sticks from the ground. Everything down there is soaked through. Instead, Native Americans looked for dead branches still attached to trees. These standing dead branches were protected by the canopy above and often remained dry even in extended rain. They'd look for branches about the thickness of a pencil up to a thumb, snap them off and check the inside by breaking them. If they snapped cleanly with a sharp crack, they were dry. If they bent or made a dull break, they were too wet. The lowest dead branches on evergreen trees were particularly good. The tree's living canopy above provided shelter, and these branches were often resinous, making them extra flammable. Size mattered with kindling. Native Americans would gather a range of sizes, from twigs as thin as toothpicks up to pieces as thick as your wrist. You needed the fine stuff to build on your tinder flame, then progressively larger pieces to build heat. Rush to big pieces too fast, and you'd smother your young fire. Fuel wood was the final category. These are the larger pieces that would keep your fire burning for hours. In the rain, you had to think strategically. Green wood won't burn well, even when dry, and wet wood needs massive amounts of heat to drive off the moisture before it'll burn. Native Americans looked for standing dead trees or large dead branches. The key was wood that was elevated off the ground, protected from sitting in water. They'd test the wood by looking at the bark. If bark fell off easily, the wood underneath was often in the right condition, dead but not rotten. When they found a good piece, they didn't just drag the whole wet log to camp. They'd process it right there. Using stone tools, they'd split the log open to access the dry interior. The outside might be wet, but if the wood was sound, the inside stayed dry. They'd split this into manageable pieces, each with some dry interior exposed. Different woods burned differently, and tribes knew their local species intimately. Hardwoods like oak and maple burned hot and long. Softwoods like pine ignited easier, but burned faster. In the rain, they'd often start with resinous softwoods to get a strong fire going, then add hardwoods for sustained heat. Here's something critical that Native Americans understood. You needed to gather far more material than you thought you'd need. In good conditions, gathering as you go works fine. In the rain, your fire is fragile. You can't leave it to gather more wood. So they'd spend time up front collecting everything they needed, creating a stockpile of progressively sized materials from fine tinder to large fuel logs. This preparation phase might take an hour or more, but it made the difference between success and failure. It was time invested.
Unique characteristics. This one is more flexible, good for weaving, while this darker wood is stronger, better for structural uses.
Once Native Americans gathered materials, they had to keep them dry while preparing their fire site. This meant working smart, not just hard. First priority, find or create shelter, not for themselves necessarily, but for their fire materials and their fire site. Even a small amount of overhead protection made a huge difference. Natural shelters were ideal. A rock overhang provided excellent protection. The underside of a large fallen tree with intact root system could create a dry space. Thick stands of evergreen trees, especially mature ones with dense canopies, created relatively dry zones underneath. Even the space beneath a large boulder could work. If natural shelter wasn't available, Native Americans would create it. In heavy rain, they might construct a simple lean-to using large pieces of bark, branches with leaves still attached, or by leaning poles against a fallen log and covering them with layers of evergreen boughs. This didn't have to be fancy. It just needed to keep rain off the immediate work area. The fire site itself required preparation. You couldn't build directly on soaking wet ground. Native Americans would create a dry platform. Sometimes this meant finding dry rocks and laying them as a base. Other times they'd layer dry bark or split dry wood to create a raised platform that elevated the fire above wet ground. Processing materials properly was crucial. That cedar bark we talked about? It needed to be worked until it was fluffy and separated. This wasn't just about making it fine enough to catch fire. Working the material helped drive out moisture and created more surface area for ignition. Pine wood with high resin content could be shaved into thin curls called feather sticks. You take a dry stick and carefully carve thin shavings that stay attached at one end, creating something that looks like a wooden feather. These curls catch fire much easier than solid wood because they have more surface area, and the thin shavings dry out quickly, even if slightly damp. Native Americans often carried a fire kit with them. This wasn't cheating, it was smart. The kit might include processed tinder, bundled and kept dry, perhaps wrapped in bark or animal hide. Some carried char cloth made from burning plant material in a low-oxygen environment, creating material that caught sparks easily. Others kept a coal carrier, a special container that could keep embers alive for hours or even days, eliminating the need to start fire from scratch. But when they didn't have these items, or when materials got wet despite precautions, they knew how to dry things out. Small pieces could be placed inside clothing, using body heat to dry them. Larger pieces could be placed near an existing fire if one was available. They might even prepare materials the night before if they knew rain was coming, keeping processed tinder in waterproof containers made from bark, hollow logs, or animal bladders. The key principle was this: every step you take to prepare materials and protect them from moisture makes the actual fire starting exponentially easier. Native Americans weren't tougher than us. They were smarter. They worked with nature, understanding that preventing wetness was easier than overcoming it. Friction fire methods. Now we get to the actual fire starting. Native Americans developed several friction methods, all based on the same principle. Rubbing wood against wood creates heat. Do it right, and you can generate enough heat to create an ember. The bow drill was perhaps the most sophisticated friction method. It consists of 4 parts: a bow, a drill or spindle, a fireboard, and a handhold or socket. The bow was usually a slightly curved piece of wood with cordage connecting the 2 ends. Sinew, plant fiber, or rawhide served as the cord. The drill was a straight piece of wood, usually about the diameter of your thumb, smooth and as straight as possible. The fireboard was a flat piece of wood where the drilling happened. The socket was a piece of wood, bone, or stone that you held in your hand to apply downward pressure on top of the drill. Here's how it worked. The drill stood upright on the fireboard, the bowstring wrapped once around the drill. You held the socket on top of the drill with one hand and the bow in the other. Moving the bow back and forth spun the drill rapidly against the fireboard, but technique mattered enormously. You couldn't just saw back and forth randomly. Native Americans used smooth, controlled strokes, using the full length of the bow. They kept the drill perpendicular to the fireboard and applied steady downward pressure. The motion was rhythmic, almost meditative. As the drill spun against the fireboard, it created friction, which generated heat. The wood began to smoke. The friction wore away both the drill and the fireboard, creating fine wood dust. This dust, heated by the friction, eventually became hot enough to form a coal. Wood selection was critical. You needed the right hardness. Too hard and you couldn't generate enough friction. Too soft and the wood would wear away without creating sufficient heat. Different tribes favored different woods based on what grew locally. Cottonwood, willow, cedar, and aspen all worked well. Many used the same wood type for both drill and fireboard, but some preferred slightly harder wood for the drill. Even in the rain, the bow drill could work. The key was using dry wood for the fireboard and drill, and working under shelter so rain didn't cool the friction point. The downward pressure and rapid spinning actually helped dry out any slight surface moisture through the heat generated. The hand drill was simpler, but required more skill and physical endurance. It was just 2 parts, a drill and a fireboard. You spun the drill between your palms, moving your hands rapidly down the drill as you spun it, creating friction against the fireboard. This method was favored in warmer regions where softer woods were available. The hand drill required the softest woods to work effectively because you couldn't generate as much pressure or speed as with a bow drill. Yucca, mullein, and other pithy plants worked well. The technique was demanding. You started with your hands at the top of the drill, spinning rapidly while applying pressure. As your hands moved down the drill, you had to maintain speed and pressure. When you reached the bottom, you had to quickly return your hands to the top without stopping the drill's momentum. Experienced practitioners could do this smoothly, maintaining continuous motion until a coal formed. In wet conditions, the hand drill was actually harder to use than the bow drill because any moisture on your hands affected your grip. Native Americans would dry their hands thoroughly, sometimes rubbing them with dry plant material or fine sand to improve grip. The fire plow was used less commonly but was effective in certain conditions. It involved a stick dragged rapidly back and forth in a groove carved in a softer piece of wood. The friction created hot wood particles that accumulated at the end of the groove. This method was more common in tropical and subtropical regions, where very soft woods were available. In the rain, it had the advantage of continuously pushing any surface moisture away from the friction point. Regardless of the method, creating the coal was only half the battle. The coal itself wouldn't give you flame. It was a glowing ember, hot but not burning. You had to transfer this carefully to your tinder bundle. Native Americans would prepare a tinder nest in advance. This was a bird's nest-shaped bundle of the finest, driest tinder, with fluffier material on the outside and slightly denser material at the core. When the coal formed, they'd carefully transfer it to this nest, placing it in contact with the dense core material. Then came the critical step, providing oxygen. They gently fold the nest around the coal and blow on it. Not hard puffs that might blow out the coal, but steady, sustained breaths that fed oxygen to the coal. The tinder would begin to smoke more intensely. You'd see it glow brighter. Keep blowing steadily and suddenly, flame would burst into life. This moment required complete focus. Too little oxygen and the coal would die. Too much too fast and you'd blow it apart. Native Americans learned the exact amount of breath needed, the steady rhythm that transformed ember into flame. They'd often crouch close to protect the nest from wind and rain while blowing on it. Once flame appeared, they'd quickly but carefully transfer the burning tinder bundle to their prepared fire lay, placing it under the finest kindling they'd gathered, adding progressively larger pieces as the fire grew. In the rain, this entire process happened under shelter. They'd protect the growing fire from raindrops that could extinguish young flames. Only once the fire was strong enough to resist rain would they stop sheltering it so intensely. Percussion methods. Friction wasn't the only way Native Americans created fire. Percussion methods, using stone to create sparks, were highly effective. The flint and steel method came after contact with Europeans, so we won't focus on it much. But Native Americans used percussion long before steel arrived. Flint and pyrite was the original percussion method. It required two stones, a piece of flint or similar hard, sharp stone, and a piece of pyrite or marcasite, which are iron sulfide minerals. When you struck flint sharply against pyrite, tiny fragments of the pyrite would break off. These fragments, heated by the impact, ignited in air, creating sparks. These sparks were hot but brief, cooler than modern lighter sparks, but hot enough to ignite properly prepared tinder. The technique was all about the angle and speed of the strike. You didn't pound the stones together. You struck a sharp edge of flint against the pyrite using a glancing blow, creating a scraping impact that sheared off the hottest particles. The target was char cloth or specially prepared punk wood. These materials caught sparks extremely well. Punk wood was wood decomposed to a specific stage where it was soft and punky, but not completely rotten. When dried thoroughly, it caught sparks and held them as a slow, smoldering coal. Native Americans would strike sparks directly onto their prepared tinder or char material. Once a spark caught and began smoldering, they'd blow gently to encourage it, just as with friction fire coals, then transfer it to their tinder nest to create flame. In rain, percussion had advantages over friction. The stones didn't care if they were wet. Water didn't affect the striking surfaces the way it affected friction surfaces. You could strike sparks in pouring rain if you had dry tinder to catch them. The challenge was keeping that tinder dry and protecting the caught spark long enough to develop into a sustainable ember. Different regions had different access to the right stones. Not everywhere had flint or pyrite readily available. In areas without these resources, friction methods dominated. In areas with good stone resources, percussion was often preferred because it was faster and required less physical effort once you had the right materials. Some tribes would trade for flint and pyrite if they didn't have local sources. These firestones were valuable trade goods, recognized across different groups as essential survival tools. Rain-specific techniques and strategies. Native Americans developed specific strategies for maintaining fire in ongoing rain, not just starting it. Fire positioning mattered enormously. A fire built in the open wouldn't survive heavy rain, no matter how well you started it. Native Americans chose sites carefully, near large rocks that provided windbreak and reflected heat, under natural overhangs, in areas where the tree canopy was thick enough to shed most rain away from the fire. They'd build rain shields or above fires when natural shelter wasn't enough.
Perfect for quick fires in
These
this
were
dry
simple
region.
structures, often just bark or hide stretched between poles, positioned at an angle to shed water away from the fire while still allowing smoke to escape. The shield didn't have to be fancy. It just needed to deflect rain. Fire lays were designed for wet conditions. Instead of the simple teepee of sticks you might use in dry weather, they'd build more complex structures. One common approach was the log cabin lay. Parallel logs stacked in alternating layers with plenty of airspace between them. This created a structure that held up even as pieces burned, maintained good airflow, and had enough mass to resist rain cooling the fire too quickly. Another approach was the platform fire. They'd lay large logs as a base, then build the fire on top of this platform. This elevated the fire above wet ground and provided a large mass of drying wood that would eventually burn, sustaining the fire for hours. Progressive sizing was crucial in rain. You couldn't jump from tiny kindling to large logs. Native Americans would prepare materials in many gradual size increases. Each layer had to catch and burn substantially before adding the next size up. This patience prevented smothering the fire with too much wet material too fast. They'd also dry wood progressively. By placing larger, wetter pieces near, but not on the fire, the heat would drive moisture out of these pieces, preparing them to become fuel later. By the time you needed these pieces, they'd be dry enough to burn. Fire maintenance. In rain meant constant attention. You couldn't build a fire and walk away. Someone tended it, adding fuel regularly, adjusting the structure to maintain good airflow, and protecting it from wind-driven rain. When rain was heavy, they might reduce the fire temporarily, maintaining just enough to keep it alive, then building it back up when conditions improved. Some tribes would keep the multiple fires. A main fire for cooking and warmth, and a backup fire or at least prepared materials and coals that could restart fire quickly if the main one failed. This redundancy made sense when fire was this precious. Banking fires. Overnight was an art form. They'd cover a good bed of coals with ash and place large logs over them. This protected the coals from rain, reduced oxygen to prevent them from burning out, and allowed the fire to smolder slowly. In the morning, even after rain all night, they could uncover hot coals and quickly rebuild the fire. If they had to move camp in rain, they'd carry fire with them. This might be coals in a carrier made from bark or green wood, packed with damp moss or rotted wood that would smolder without bursting into flame. Or they'd carry a piece of punk wood that was actively smoldering, kept protected from rain, and blown into flame when needed. Teaching and knowledge transmission. This knowledge didn't come from books or videos. It was passed down through generations in very specific ways that ensured it survived and remained practical. Children learn by watching and helping. A young child might just gather tinder, learning to identify the right materials. As they got older, they'd process materials, learning the feel of properly prepared tinder. Eventually, they'd attempt the fire starting themselves under supervision. This progression built genuine skill. You couldn't fake it. Either you created fire or you didn't. The physical feedback was immediate and honest. Stories reinforced the lessons. Tribal stories often contain practical information embedded in memorable narratives. A story about an ancestor surviving a terrible storm might contain details about where they found dry materials and how they protected their fire. These stories made the knowledge stick. Elders held specialized knowledge. Certain individuals might be recognized as particularly skilled at fire making or at finding materials. Young people would seek them out, learning not just the basics, but the refinements that separated adequate skill from mastery. Knowledge varied by region because resources varied. A young person learning in the Pacific Northwest learned different materials and techniques than someone in the Southwest or Great Plains, but the underlying principles remain the same: observation, preparation, patience, and respect for the materials. This wasn't considered optional knowledge. It was fundamental survival skill, as essential as knowing how to find water or build shelter. Everyone in the tribe needed at least basic competence. Lives might depend on it. The knowledge was also communal. It wasn't hoarded or kept secret. Sharing knowledge made the entire group more resilient. If one person failed, another could succeed. This collective competence was a form of insurance against disaster. So there you have it. Starting fire in the rain wasn't magic. It was knowledge, skill, and preparation. Native Americans succeeded where we might fail today because they understood their environment intimately. They knew where to look for dry materials even in wet conditions. They knew how to process and prepare materials properly. They knew multiple methods and could choose the right one for the situation, and they had the patience to do it right rather than rushing and failing. This knowledge represented thousands of years of accumulated experience, refined through necessity and passed down through generations. Every successful fire taught lessons. Every failure did too. Over time, this created a body of knowledge that was remarkably sophisticated. What we've covered today barely scratches the surface. Every tribe had their own refinements, their own favorite materials and techniques, their own stories and teachings about fire. But the core principles we've discussed, finding dry materials, proper preparation, protection from the elements, mastered technique, and patience, those were universal. These skills aren't just historical curiosities. The principles still apply. Understanding how to work with natural materials, how to read your environment, how to prepare properly and stay patient even when conditions are difficult, these lessons extend far beyond fire making. The Native Americans who could make fire in pouring rain weren't superhuman. They were deeply knowledgeable, well-practiced, and respectful of both the power of fire and the challenges of nature. That combination made them capable of things that seem impossible to us today. If you want to explore this knowledge further, I encourage you to practice these skills yourself. Start in good conditions. Learn the materials in your region. Build the muscle memory and the understanding. Then when you face real challenges, you'll have the foundation these skills require. That's the legacy of knowledge we've explored today. Not just how to make fire in the rain, but how human beings learn to thrive in nature through observation, practice, and respect for the world around them. Like, subscribe and comment where you're watching from.